Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another webinar from A Place in the Sun Limited. My name is Andy Bridge. We are the publishers of A Place in the Sun magazine, and we run the overseas property portal, aplaceinthesun.com, and also organise exhibitions, A Place in the Sun Live. Imaginatively enough, we have a currency company too, which is called A Place in the Sun Currency. Now, for today's webinar, I was tempted to wear my blue t-shirt with the yellow stars on it, but I then made the wise decision that that's not what this webinar is about. We're not here to debate the rights and wrongs of UK EU membership. It is what it is, as people keep saying, except it isn't really, because we still don't know what it is. We still don't know what a withdrawal agreement looks like. So what we do know is that this is our most popular webinar to date. And this morning we had to frantically upgrade our subscription to this webinar platform to accommodate all of you. Over 1,500 people have signed up for this webinar. So thank you for your time. We do really appreciate it. There are lots of things I don't know in this world, and I don't know what's going on at the moment with Brexit and Brexit negotiations. So I'm here to ask our panelists lots of questions. I'm also here to ask questions on your behalf, and you will see a question mark icon on your screen. Please feel free to click that at any time and send in your questions. The aim of quizzing my panel, of course, is to separate fact from fake, to separate the current situation from speculation as what may transpire. And this panel hopefully will shed light on all these issues. So let me ask them to introduce themselves. Paola, first of all, I can say it's 25 degrees here in London. I did have sardines for lunch, and I do have 2 bottles of Sagres in the fridge. So hello to Portugal.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon, Andy, Alex, Jason, Richard, and all the people. I'm a Portuguese independent lawyer living in Portugal and working from the Algarve, representing for clients in their interest in Portugal.
Thank you, Paola. And in no particular order, Richard, how are you?
I'm well, thank you, Andy. Pining for some Spanish sunshine, although we've got a bit of sunshine in the south of England at the moment. But yeah, I'm a Spanish homeowner, second homeowner. My place is in the northern part of the Costa Brava, just under the Pyrenees on the Bay of Rosas. I'm also an international property journalist, so I write about not only Spain, but all the countries around the world where British people like to buy homes or places or move to. And I write for Place in the Sun magazine. I was the editor for a few years, not so long ago as well. And I also write articles for a variety of websites and publications. So I'm reasonably in the loop with things happening in the international property market.
Fantastic, thank you. And Jason, how are you doing?
I'm fine. Glad to be here. I'm Jason Porter. I'm a director with Blevins Franks in the UK. And I'm formerly, well, actually still qualified chartered tax advisor and financial advisor in the UK. We're an organisation that has offices across France, Spain, Portugal, Malta and Cyprus. So we deal with most of the locations where UK nationals like to move to.
Thank you, Jason. And Alex, where are you and how are you?
Buenas tardes, Andy. I'm joining you from sunny Marbella. It's 23 degrees here today. And I'm an English solicitor and a Spanish lawyer, partner with my law in Spain. My parents moved out to Spain in 1981 when Spain wasn't a member of the EU. And I returned back to the UK to study, to become a lawyer, started practicing as a solicitor in 99, and I came back to Spain in 2003. And I act for clients, British clients mainly, and international clients, buying, selling, inheriting property in Spain, and also doing business in Spain. And currently we're quite busy in helping people apply for and obtain their residency here.
Thank you. Richard, I'm going to turn to you first. Now, as you've explained, you're a homeowner in Spain on the Costa Brava. And before we get into the detail of pre and post Brexit property transactions, I'm interested in your personal view and how you feel about fast approaching Brexit, given that you own property in a foreign country, in Spain, in an EU member country. How do you feel about what's coming? Are you concerned in any way?
I'm not concerned. No, as a second homeowner, I'm obviously not a resident in Spain. I'm not currently trying to become a resident in Spain. So really, it's a case of having an asset in a foreign country, and that is not going to change in any way or shape once Brexit happens. So, you know, I'll continue to be a legal owner of that property. There is talk of certain taxes increasing because once the UK isn't an EU state, you know, they'll be free to set different rates of. I think they're talking about income tax on rental income that may increase. It's still an unknown, but it will be a negligible difference to the things that you know, that happen now to people like myself. In terms of what effects could there be, I suppose travel, if there's a visa process introduced for getting in and out of Spain, that might make my journeys a little bit longer, but I can't see it being a huge difference. And in fact, both countries want to keep an easy passage of travellers between the two countries, because it's certainly in Spain's interest to have British tourists and second homeowners, you know, could still attract to the country. So negligible.
Absolutely. Negligible. Okay, but what, just before we get into what the future might look like then, what's your, I know you're not a resident, but what are your current responsibilities as a homeowner? What do you have a fiscal presence in Spain?
I do. Even second homeowners who don't rent their properties out have to make a return in Spain every year. It's called the IRNR, the non-residence income tax. It's a nominal tax. It's a percentage of the catastral value of your property. For me, it works out about 180 euros a year. So you are making a return, and you're on the radar in that way. I have a bank account there, of course. I have the NIE number, which everyone needs to buy property or to do most basic financial transactions in Spain. I pay my council tax, which is about 600 euros a year. I think it's in 3 or 4 tranches. So those are my sort of ongoing financial obligations in Spain at the moment.
Great. So, Jason, how about you just remind us what stage we're at with the whole Brexit process and what the next stages are going to look like? I mean, the coronavirus unbelievably has knocked Brexit off the front page of the newspapers, something we never considered as imaginable. But what is the current situation and what are we looking at?
It's funny you should say that about the coronavirus, because I was looking for any news reports following the 11th May round of negotiations, and there was very few in the papers whatsoever because coronavirus was dominating the headlines so much. What we're looking at now is we're in the sort of second set of negotiations, really for the second agreement, and it's the agreement that's then going to take us beyond the end of the withdrawal agreement period, beyond the transitional period, 31st December. They met initially in early March. Then there was a 6-week gap because of the coronavirus. There was then a video conference in the 20th of April, another one on the 11th of May, and this week they are sitting down again to talk by way of video conference. But there's massive fundamental differences in the positions that both sides are taking, in that the EU wants to have one large agreement covering virtually every single aspect of what they're negotiating, whilst the UK wants to have a free trade agreement covering trades and services, and then a number of side agreements which will be negotiated side by side around things like fisheries, data, financial services, policing, all that kind of thing. So there's what the EU wants and what the UK wants. The starting points are completely different. So we are in a little bit of a tussle at the moment about what's going on. There's lots of barbs flying backwards and forwards in the press between both sides. But it will be interesting as we go on, as the deadline gets nearer, much like it did previously, will that narrow people's minds to actually start sitting down to negotiate properly. There's obviously 2 important dates coming up. We have the 30th of June, which is the date by which the UK would have to extend by 12 or 24 months the withdrawal period. Boris has put it into law that he effectively isn't allowed to do that, though he could obviously have a vote in Parliament to set that to one side. And then we obviously have the 31st December deadline coming up. It's actually not so much the 31st December deadline that's the most important date, is that the EU have to agree amongst all 27 member states the agreement that might be agreed between Barnier and the UK negotiators. So that effectively is October, so it's a much earlier date than, say, the 31st of December. So that's where we are. Everything's up in the air. We don't know what the rules might be, but hopefully as time starts counting down, people's minds will start getting a little bit more switched on.
Yeah, of course, and we've got these contentious issues with something like fisheries policy, which I think fishery counts for, I don't know, less than 0.1 or 0.5% of our GDP, and yet it's clearly going to be a huge sticking issue, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the main issues which, as you say, it makes up such a minor part of the overall trade side of things that it seems a bit strange, but it obviously is a large political football on both sides.
Okay, well, let's just ask our audience of their position and what they're looking to do. We're going to launch a quick poll, and if everybody out there will be good enough to tick the box that most readily applies to you. So what describes your timescale for buying or becoming resident in Europe? As soon as possible, definitely sometime next year, or a little bit more vague, sometime in the future, but you're not sure when. If you just click one of those answers for us, and that will give us a valuable insight into people's aspirations and plans. And let's just take a look at the numbers there. So, okay, 45% are definitely sometime in the future, but they're not sure when. And then a pretty even split, 26 and 28% of people, as soon as possible, definitely sometime next year. So that's good. We know the type of audience that we're speaking to. And Richard, I think it's important to distinguish all the time we go through this webinar, people who are looking to buy a second home and not live there, and people are looking to relocate permanently, because they're in the context of what we're discussing today, they're very different things, aren't they?
Yes, they are, Andy. I referred to it in my first comments when I said I'm a second homeowner. When you're the regulation of the laws that govern buying and owning property in Spain, France, Portugal, they're not governed by the EU. They're set by their sovereign laws. They're set by their own country's governments. So nothing is going to change regarding your rights to buy in Portugal, Spain, France at all, and your ongoing ownership rights. Just as myself now, as a second homeowner, nothing's going to change because of Brexit. So I would say don't let Brexit put you off at all if you're looking at a second home. And if you're thinking about moving in sometime in the future or becoming a resident, whichever country it is, in 2, 3, 4 years time, you're in a good position, because you'll see the landscape settle after Brexit, and then you've got time to plan things even more to suit your circumstances. There's reassurance as well from the fact that people from all over the world, not just Europe, the UK, or indeed the EU, buy in these countries. I'm sure my fellow panelists can give you examples of international people from Asia, America, South Africa, who are regularly buying and moving to the countries where they represent. So and there are ways around it. If it involves a slightly longer application process to get a visa and get enough years of residency under your belt to get permanent residency, then you'll go through the course of what you need to do, and these people are there to help you. I'm not saying that UK nationals will have to get visas, but I mean that's sort of the worst case scenario. But as regards ownership of property, it won't be affected by Brexit.
Okay, Alex, I've been speaking to, as I regularly do, a number of agents in Spain and across the rest of Europe, and anecdotally there are a number of people who are trying to squeeze in a property purchase and move to a particular country before the end of the year for a number of, I think, self-evident reasons. But just explain how it stands now. If you were able to do that, or indeed if you're an existing property owner, what rights do you have, and what is going to happen after the end of this year?
Okay, so just owning a property doesn't automatically give you those residency rights, but those are one of the criteria to apply for residency is that you either own a property or have a rental contract in place for 12 months. Okay, so we are talking to a lot of people at the moment who haven't actually found a property yet, haven't found a property to buy or to rent, but they want to start the process moving. So they certainly can, you know, they can contact us. We can put powers of attorney in place, ready to buy a property for them as and when they're ready. But they can, for example, open up bank accounts now, Andy, because another criteria from Spain is that you have to have a bank account open for at least 3 months, and you have to have money going in there. And once they've applied for residency, so I'd say the process of buying, it could take between 4 and 12 weeks, and the residency process probably a similar amount of time, but about 3 months, depending on the region. Remember, in Spain we've got 17 different regions, and each region has different criteria for residency, broadly the same, but just the amounts in bank accounts change. So there is enough time to do that before the end of the year. And if you do that before the end of the year, that means you obtain your residency certificate. At the moment, it's a green card. And then next year, after the transition period has expired, Spain will be updating that with a photographic ID, and it's likely that will allow people who've got the Spanish residency to travel around Europe without the need for a visa. And then we can talk about this later, but basically part of the criteria is that they've got to have health insurance in place or be entitled to healthcare here. So that's generally the process. But if people are coming to Spain this year, I'd certainly recommend trying to get that residency application in before the end of the year.
Paula, to bring you in, is that a similar position in Portugal?
Yes, indeed. I'm recommending people also to do the residency until the 31st of December, because that will give them the guarantee that they will keep all their rights, healthcare, residency. As likely Alex just said, here we also need to have a bank account in place for 3 months. So that's something that people can upfront start to organize. The amounts of money, they are not very excessive. It's around 1,500 euros to apply for residency. And differently than what Alex said, here the residency is given in 24 hours.
Right, okay. And you have clients who are currently doing that with you, trying to get that in before the end of the year?
Yes, we have lots of people since last year asking to do their residency. We have advised the same as Alex. If they buy, they are sought out. Otherwise, they need to have a rental agreement at least of 6 months. I had clients that they stayed in hotels for 3-4 months. That does not suit for getting residence. So they really need a rental agreement that proves the intention of staying for a long term.
Okay, thank you, Paula. And Jason, before we get on to post-Brexit landscape, can you just outline for us the main entitlements that we British and other EU citizens benefit from when moving to another EU state?
Obviously, we know what those rules are at the moment for the current year under the withdrawal agreement. We don't know what they might be for those people that arrive after 31st December.
So just take us through what they currently are. Just tick off what we currently benefit from.
Okay, so at the moment you have the ability to use the European Health Insurance card for the first 3 months to get you the health cover for the first 3 months, otherwise known as the EHIT card. You have freedom of movement, so you can go backwards and forwards between the UK and any other EU nation, really, for as long as you wish, backwards and forwards, moving between countries. And for those people that are over retirement age, over state pension age from a UK perspective, then they can obtain an S1 certificate from the Department of Health and Social Security, which will allow them to get reciprocal healthcare in the country they choose to move to, where the National Health will effectively cover those costs for them and will repay those costs to the health authority in country. In addition, when it comes to the state pension, they will automatically be entitled to the inflationary increases, the triple lock as it's called in the UK, to allow them to get those increases on an annual basis that whatever a UK national in the UK would get. In addition, some people don't see it as important, but where there is a large amount of perhaps work in the EU taking place across a number of countries, there's something called social security coordination, which means that any years that you spend working in Europe as well as the UK all go towards a state pension benefit in the long run, rather than having to do 10 years in a particular country to start your entitlement. If you've done 10 years across the EU, then your entitlement starts there. So there is a benefit from that perspective as well.
Okay, and the people who contact your business, from the point of view of their concerns, what do they raise with you most often as the issues that are concerning them post Brexit?
I would say initially it was the healthcare and the state pension, because obviously those are the two things which potentially in a worst case scenario could fall away, in that they'll just have their state pension, UK state pension fixed, or whatever it is, the points at which they go, a bit like you see for people who perhaps move to Australia at the moment. Then also from the healthcare perspective, obviously if you're having to pay that privately, as you get older and older, then the cost of that per year could be quite substantial. So that's something that people are worried about having to factor into their annual outgoings. I think one of the things that probably people are starting to look at now is, well, what will be the process for obtaining legal residency? Because it's been something that an awful lot of people haven't perhaps worried about, because they could have moved to Europe under freedom of movement and then sorted out their residency card once they get there, pretty much at their leisure, in country with their local prefecture, as it would be in France, and not have to do that within a certain time frame. Obviously, in a worst case scenario now for people arriving after 31st December, most people will probably be looking to sort that out before they actually leave the UK, and then they'll have to be doing it at the local, say, French embassy or consulate in the UK before they go. They're probably going to have to attend an interview. So it just becomes a bit more of a lengthy process, a bit more of an obstacle to actually moving.
And Paula, do you find that similar in Portugal? Is that the sort of questions that people are asking you? Is it about healthcare and pension provision?
Yes, indeed. According to the last things that I have read, the Portuguese government will try to do everything to keep the same rights people have in this moment, as long as the UK recognizes those rights to Portuguese. So healthcare is one of the most important questions, and yes, as long as the person that wants to come and live in Portugal has contributed to the UK system until the 31st of December of this year, will see their rights recognized in Portugal and have access to the Portuguese health system, as well as with the driving licenses and everything. Everyone that until the 31st of December, people will keep exactly the same rights that they have in this moment.
Okay, so this is the big question of reciprocity, isn't it? Which we all hope is the point that we'll get to, whereby rights will be recognised both within the UK for EU citizens and vice versa. Let's just check how our attendees are getting on and what concerns they have. So if I can just launch this poll, and here are 4 options for concerns that you may have. Select the greatest concern here, if you would, and let us know. Are you worried about getting residency? Is it healthcare related? Is it income and pension? Or is it work or study opportunities? Now, obviously, it could be a combination of those, but we're just going to try and get a sense of which of those are most of a concern to our listeners. Okay, so well, healthcare really is up there, over 51%. So that really is interesting and matches, I think, Jason, what your clients have been saying to you. Alex, is that a similar question that you get asked quite frequently?
Yeah, and actually, Andy, a lot of people are concerned about this, but what we actually find is that when we go and obtain quotes from health providers, the health insurance is not as expensive as the applicants thought. So, we set up a website called getspanishResidency.com, and on there we've got insurance companies who can provide quotes. And you're talking someone who's in good health. You're talking about from 55 onwards, probably about €1,000 a year. So it's although
that's for private health cover.
For health cover, so basically it has to be a fully comprehensive health cover policy for the whole year, and with no kind of, you know, if you had an accident, would you have to pay any extras? No, it's got to be fully comprehensive. But yeah, you're looking at from €1,000. So depending on the age and if there's any previous ailments, etc. But I think that's quite reasonable in the great scheme of things. So although it's a concern, I think people should actually really go and obtain a quote from a healthcare provider in the country where they're looking to move to.
And have you got any indication of what that rises to for somebody of, I don't know, let's say 70 rather than 55?
No, I haven't. But what's interesting, Andy, is that here in Spain, basically, once you've, so for example, at the moment, anyone over the age of 65 who's retired in the UK can come to Spain and obtain Form S1 from the Social Security office in Newcastle, and that will entitle them to Spanish healthcare cover. So anyone over 65 who's retired can apply for that now. If you're under the age of 65, then you need this healthcare, the private healthcare in place. So you're talking, you know, €1,000 plus for the first year. But after that first year, anybody from any country in the world, so long as they've been a resident for 1 year, can then basically apply to pay into the Spanish healthcare system, and that's known as the Convenio Especial, and that entitles them to Spanish healthcare, and they pay typically about €65 a month. Okay, so you know, it's reasonable.
And is there any indication whether that system and process will remain in place post Brexit, or is that TBC?
No, that system was introduced before Brexit. It was updated during the Brexit negotiations, not just because of Brexit, no, but because Spain's got lots of other nationalities from other countries in the world coming here to live, work, and reside, and basically Spain put that process in place. So, you know, we act for clients from all over the world, for clients from the Middle East, Australia, America, coming to Spain. As long as they've been registered here for 1 year, then they can pay into the social security system. So I really, also healthcare is, yeah, it's a concern, but it's something that people, I think, should really look into and allay those concerns.
That's really reassuring. So for the 51% of our audience who expressed that as their main concern, they could at the worst be hit with a premium, a private annual cover for the first year, and then the ability to pay into the National Health Service in effect.
Exactly that, Andy, exactly that.
Fantastic. And Paula, are you aware of costs for private medical cover in Portugal? Is that what you would propose to your clients?
Normally, I recommend people to inscribe to the national health system if they can, because if they are UE citizens, of course, because I will dare to say that our national service is very, very good. And you just pay €5 for a doctor appointment, or €17 if you need to go to hospital. So it's very affordable. But when you belong to a third country, then yes, insurance is about the same price than in Spain, 1,000, but you can have cheaper. But then if you need an operation or something like that, your compensation through the system needs to be a little bit bigger. So in Portugal, I will dare to say that the insurance you can have from €20 per month up to 100, which is the most recommendable. And to pay into the system is a little bit more expensive than in Spain, which is around €120 per month after the first year, of course.
Okay. And Jason, do you have information about, we're getting a lot of questions in about people retiring to Cyprus and France. Maybe you don't know specifically about private medical cover there, or maybe you do. What do you recommend to your clients who are looking to go to, let's say, France?
I think for those people that are arriving there or going forwards, that it's much like the others, it's going to be necessary to obtain probably private medical care for the first year. I would say the price per month is probably commensurate with what we're seeing across Spain and Portugal. But thereafter, you can access the system and perhaps access it via Puma, which is a new system that was introduced recently, or a number of years ago in France, where you expose your investment income to social charges. But that more recently, the rates that you pay has dropped from 8% to 6.5%, and the actual minimum that you have to have of investment income before you start paying at that rate has gone up from roughly 10,000 euros a year to 20,000 euros a year. So you need to have investment income in excess of that individually before you actually start having to make a contribution to get that healthcare cover. So the vast majority of people in France who choose to go that route will find that they probably don't have to contribute anything whatsoever to get access to the system.
So if you are, for example, a retiree post Brexit to France, and you could potentially, as far as we know at the moment, benefit from that Puma system, and if you were had less income than 20,000 euros per year, you wouldn't need to contribute to it. Have I understood that correctly?
That's correct. So effectively, it's calculated in the French tax return on an annual basis, and then you would pay the 6.5% on the amount in excess. I think it's about 19,500 euros of investment income that you might have over that amount. That's obviously if you can't qualify via the S1 route, then that is a route that you can go to get the healthcare in France at a relatively minimal cost.
Okay, and we've that tallies with a question we've had in from Ross Groves. He is under the impression that you have to have residency for 5 years before you can qualify for Puma, or he's asking that question. Is that the case? Do you know?
There's quite a lot of confusion in the rules in France because there was old rules for EU nationals moving to France compared to the rules for non-EU nationals moving to France. And in that rather ridiculous situation, non-EU nationals moving to France were in a far better position because they could get into the system after 3 months, and EU nationals couldn't get in the system until they'd been there for 5 years and got permanent residency. They've tried to align the systems now so you can get in after 3 months. But as I said, for people to get a residence card and get themselves sorted out and in the country, it's likely that they're going to have to get private healthcare cover for probably the first year, so they can then subsequently over the next few months, the next 12 months, make sure they can access the system correctly. But there is still some confusion amongst those people that are looking at the legislation between whether it's 5 years or whether you can get in immediately after 3 months. It should be that you can get in after 3 months.
Well, it's wonderful you know so much detail on France. Can I try you on another country then? What about Cyprus?
See, now you're making me look a fool. I don't know anything about Cyprus.
I've got 25 more I was going to ask you about. Okay, so something else that is coming up on the questions, I have seen it here, and I've got so many questions coming in, and I can't see who actually raised this question, but specifically for you, Paula, the non-habitual residence scheme, which has been a big driver of investment in Portugal. Could you briefly explain the benefits around that as it currently sits and what your view is of the future?
Regarding to the non-habitual residence, it's a very simple process to obtain. You can obtain if you decide to retire in Portugal or if you decide to come and live in Portugal. If you decide to come and retire in Portugal, at this moment, your income will be taxed at a rate of 10%, flat rate. If you want to come and live in Portugal, you will have a special income rate of 20% over your income. Doesn't matter how much you earn. So those are the attractives, and this is a dual agreement in between Portugal and several countries. We have them also with Canada, which means that people can come to Portugal even after Brexit, benefiting from this agreement. And I think it will stay in place. Don't see any reason for not keeping it, as it has been a major attraction for people to invest in Portugal.
Okay, Richard, and let's just fast forward then to January 2021. I'm going to ask Alex and Paula later specifically, but as a general point, what's your sense of what these governments will feel about British homeowners and British investment? What do is it in their interest to be specifically prickly with us, or is it going to be an ongoing welcome, or what's your sense of the situation?
Frustration, primarily. I think there's I mean, Paula said earlier, I'm sure Alex would agree in Spain, that the general feeling is that, you know, they want us British people to keep coming to France, Spain, Portugal and buying property and enjoying the lifestyle. You know, when I go out to the Costa Brava and I sit and have a drink on the seafront and chat to people, they want us there, they enjoy us being there. There's a sense of bewilderment about why we sort of are saying we don't really want to be a part of you. I've had conversations with that, like that, and so I think it's really going to come down to top level negotiation, because they can't really they don't want to give ground for their own nationals living in the UK if you know it's not reciprocated, and it may come down to that. I don't know. In terms of you know, freedom of travel, residency processes, income earning thresholds, whatever. I think the key thing is, and we're talking about it a lot now, is really getting in before the transition ends, so you know absolutely where you stand, and that is something that is a level playing ground across the UK for EU nationals in the UK now, and UK nationals in the EU now. So that's the one thing we do know at the moment, is that if you do the process and follow it through before the end of the year, there is no doubt about where you stand. Other than that, it's so difficult to say, because it's changed. I mean, who would have known 2 years ago we'd be in this situation, now potentially facing another extension because of another unknown phenomenon that's hit us, the coronavirus. It's been a very unpredictable 18 months, 2 years. So the willing is there, but you know, I just hope that they can show some kind of you know, accommodation or rules for British people and pensioners who want to go and live in Spain, France, Portugal, and keep the flow, keep it moving.
Alex, perhaps you can give us a sense of the importance of expat communities within particular areas of Spain, specifically, and also maybe assuage the fears of Darren Howells. Do I have to complete a property purchase by 31st of December to be able to buy a property in Spain? What happens after that if there's no extension? I mean, we've tried to cover that, but a short answer and maybe a wider answer.
Okay, so the short answer is that the buying costs and the process for the buying will be the same as it is now for British people compared to next year. Nothing is going to change as far as the buying costs are concerned and the buying process. As I said earlier, we act for clients from all over the world buying property in Spain, inheriting property in Spain and selling it. And the rules are the same. So there's going to be a level playing field there, okay? As far as next steps are concerned and what's going to happen, let's put things into perspective. You know, last year 18 million Brits came on holiday to Spain. More than 365,000 Brits are resident in Spain already. That's a massive economic boost to Spain, you know, the Costas and the whole of Spain. If there's no, we've got to remember at the moment we're in the transition period, and we're hoping that there'll be an orderly exit of the UK, and there'll be an agreement in place, the future trading partnership agreement. But if there isn't, then I'm pretty certain that Pedro Sanchez, or if he's still Prime Minister then, who knows, the Prime Minister of Spain at the time will pick up the phone and call Boris and say, look, Boris, can we do a deal? And we saw that recently with Macron. He picked up the phone and spoke to Boris about potentially allowing British travellers to visit France this summer. So if there's an agreement, great. If there is an agreement, then I can see Spain reaching bilateral agreements with the UK to allow and continue to allow British people to move to Spain in an orderly fashion. And like you said, it will be on a policy of it will be a reciprocal basis. So if the UK says any EU citizen coming to the UK needs to earn £25,000, then Spain will apply that same amount. So we just got to be aware of that. But we've got an interesting 6, 7, 8 months ahead of us to see actually what agreement will be put in place and what it will look like on the 1st of January next year.
Well, that touches on a point raised by Justine Gillian and also by Alan Dix. Alan asks, what do we know about income or savings levels to qualify for Spanish residency post-transition period? And Justine's question is specifically, well, it's the same question really, proof of income for moving to France sometime next year. Paula, what's the current position? And do you have a view of what next year's position might be in Portugal with regard to that question?
I think it will remain the same for the same reason that Alex just highlighted. We have people from all over the world buying in Portugal. So I don't think there many changes will be. We know that British people that will move until the 31st of December, they will guarantee the rights, the existing rights, they will be exactly the same. But I don't think that major difficulties will come in. As Alex just highlighted, buying costs are the same. The only requirement that I could foresee is the need of having the private healthcare system. And if you're going to stay for more than 90 days, maybe a visa. I don't see anything else coming worse than that.
Okay, so just clear that up for us in Spain, Alex, please. So resident, non-resident, what sort of time do you need to be spending there to be deemed to have Spain as your home?
So it's a very important point, Andy, because basically if you live in Spain, for the calendar year in Spain runs from the 1st of January to the 31st of December. So if you spend if you spend 6 months in Spain during a calendar year, then the year afterwards you've got to present a Spanish tax return between April and June on worldwide assets and income. Okay, so if you're planning to move to Spain, then it's quite important to plan that move to see how it could affect your taxes. Okay, but basically, if you're here for less than 6 months a year, then you're a non-resident. So, for example, like Richard mentioned that he owns a property up in the Costa Brava. He's a non-resident. He only pays what's known as the non-resident income tax. And if someone bought this year, they could basically they'd start paying that next year. As far as the amounts concerned for residency, unfortunately, it varies from region to region. We've got 17 autonomous regions. So you start in the Canaries, you're looking at probably about 6,500, 7,000 euros in your bank account per person. And then they want to see about 500-600 euros coming in a month. And as you come over to the mainland Spain, Costa Blanca and Costa del Sol, they typically want to see between 7,000 and 9,000 euros per person in a bank account, and then about 600 to 800 euros coming in. So it depends region to region. So again, have a look at on our website, the getspanishresidency.com. We've got some information there about the process and what's going to happen next year. Basically, we're acting for South Africans at the moment applying for residency, and they basically have to have in place typically about 2,200 euros a month of income to apply for residency, and each dependent of theirs about 500 euros. So you're looking at about 26,000 euros per applicant, which is not far from the figure that the UK has talked about for EU citizens going to live in the UK. So I mean, it's early days yet, Andy, but that when we finally sign a partnership agreement, if it gets signed, this is the detail that we'll see in that.
So currently, the reason that South African couple you're working with require a higher income level per month is because they're not EU citizens from which we would currently benefit, and which could change next year. Correct.
But we don't know, just again, to allay concerns, we don't know how much you'll need in your bank account next year if you're a British person applying to be a resident in Spain. We don't have those figures yet. But if we treated it, if we didn't have any special status, then you're looking at around 26,000 euros per person, so for the main applicant, and then 548 euros for the second applicant and beneficiaries and dependents.
But if you're spending less than 6 months of the year there anyway, this is an irrelevance.
Exactly. So what we envisage happening next year. So again, the big difference. If you spend more than 183 days, you're a Spanish tax resident. If you're left in Spain for less than 183 days, you're not a Spanish tax resident, and all you've got to pay is the non-residence income tax if you own a property. And what we envisage happening next year is that British people again, subject to the detail of the agreement, will be able to apply for a visa, and that'll be an online system, and they'll be able to spend 90 days in a 180-day period in a calendar year.
So just to explain that, so 90 days in 180 days rather than 180 days in a year.
Exactly. So if you're not going to move to Spain, but you want to come here on holiday, then we're kind of hearing on the ground here that basically British people have to apply for a visa. They'll probably be stamped as they come in at the airport, and they'll be able to spend 90 days in 180 days, and then they've got to leave the country. Whereas at the moment, you can come to Spain, you can spend as much time as you want. So next year,
Okay.
90 days in a 180-day period, and then you have to leave the country
To be deemed non-resident.
Yeah.
Yeah. And currently, Jason, I guess that's the same situation in France. If you're living there less than half the year, you're not deemed resident. But if you choose to be full time, then your worldwide income, for example, earnings on a UK rental property, would need to be declared locally in France. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly right. So go over that 6 months, then you're tax resident, and you're going to be taxed on a worldwide basis. Obviously, there are tax treaties that France has with the majority of developed countries in the world, which mean that either tax only is taxed in France or the other country, or it's taxed in both, with a credit for the tax paid in one to be able to be set off against the other. I think it's important to distinguish between what is legal residency and what is tax residency, because it can get really confusing, because the 6 month rule applies across most of Europe. So once you go over the 6 months, you're tax resident. But legal residency, certainly under what it's looking like the worst case scenario will be going forwards after 31st December. Legal residency is, if you go past 3 months, then you need to make sure that you've got a visa or something like that in place to make sure you can stay there beyond that 3 month period. And the 90 days in 180 days, I once, when I looked at it initially, thought it was 3 months in, 3 months out, 3 months in, 3 months out, but actually it's a rolling 6 month period. So, you can't come back too soon, as that 6 month period is rolling forwards. So people are going to have to keep a little bit of a close eye on what they're doing, particularly, and this is a real big issue in France, is those second homeowners that have always managed to go backwards and forwards, particularly the availability of ferries, etc., for those living in northern France. To try and make sure you stay under that 3 months in a rolling 6 month period is going to be quite difficult for those people. Otherwise, they are going to have to go through the process of applying for some form of visa. What those visas might be at the moment, we're not sure, because they may well come out with new ones for this particular type of scenario.
Okay, and Paolo, we've a number of questions coming in. Obviously, the rights associated with EU membership at the moment, currently for UK citizens, is the right to work. Is there any indication yet of what will happen post-Brexit if somebody's looking to relocate and find work in a member country? Well, in a member country which we won't be a member of.
In Portugal, what I have read is that you will keep your work qualifications as long as they were granted until the end of that year, and you can come and, of course, according to the contract rules, you can come and work here under the system that I've just referred on the beginning as a non-habitual resident, or if you come and live as a resident, you also, and if you don't want to apply for that benefit, you can work in Portugal and do all your income tax returns as a Portuguese citizen.
Okay, thank you. We're I don't know where the time has gone. We are already at 10 to 3 and we have absolutely tons of questions. So I'm just going to pick some out. There's one from Michael Power. Now, I'm no lawyer, but I am just going to give a straight answer to this. Michael asks, is there any chance of the Spanish government claiming my potential property purchase if agreement is not forged with the UK? Clearly not, Michael. I think we've made that pretty clear today that all sorts of people buy property in Spain, South Africans, South Americans, Chinese, all sorts of people. So you are going to be fine to buy a property. What we're trying to get into the nitty-gritty of today is residency versus non-residency, what we know currently about that situation and what we are only speculating on at the moment. One for you, Paula. Alan Blackman, how can you get residency if you haven't purchased a house? We have a fiscal number. We own a motorhome and are thinking of traveling down to Portugal to live on a site while looking for a property, and we intend to live there permanently. What would you suggest?
I would suggest to apply for a rental accommodation. Definitively, it's going to be difficult for somebody that's just staying on a motorhome to get residency. They will need to have definitively the rental contract, even if it's in the land, but they really need to have something.
Okay, thank you. And one for you, Alex, from Margaret Moran. What would be the latest date you could arrive in Spain for residency before the end of the transition period and to qualify for existing benefits?
That's a great question. That's a very good question indeed. And basically, the advice from the British consul at the moment is to come to Spain this year and apply for and obtain your residency this year. Okay, if you want to play it, you know, if the timescales don't quite work for you, you've got to certainly arrive this year, and then in the UK, EU nationals can apply for and obtain EU settled status up until June next year. Now, Spain hasn't mentioned anything about that yet, but we might see an extension. So many British people arriving this year might be able to apply until June next year, but there's nothing in place at the moment. So the best advice, Andy, is come to Spain this year and apply for residency. You can start the residency process now. You have to apply in person, but for example, you can start now by looking at renting a property, looking at buying a property. We can open a bank account for you. So I would say, to be safe, at least 3 to 4 months before the end of the year. So I'd say, you know, end of September, it's going to be tight.
Okay, and again with you, Alex, a question from Jim McPhail, somebody who I'm quite jealous of, actually. Him and his wife are both 55-year-old and retired. Well, I had a birthday at the weekend, which is pretty close to that, and I'm a long way off. But putting my jealousy aside, they're going to move to the Costa Blanca and live full-time and retire and become residents. How nice. I'm pleased for you, Jim. Can we touch on pensions and pension provision and what would happen with your UK pension? I know it's a big subject, but can you give us a helicopter view of that, please, Alex?
Yeah, certainly. So basically, if you've got a private pension, then you notify the pension provider that you're moving to Spain and you're going to become a tax resident in Spain, and they will pay that pension to you gross without tax. And then you'll declare that income in Spain and pay tax in it on Spain, depending on the level and the applicable rate. If you've got for example, a government pension, if you're a nurse or a teacher, then your pension will be taxed in the UK at the rate of 20%. And then because there is a double tax treaty between Spain and the UK, which won't go with Brexit, you then declare that income in Spain, but you also declare the fact that you've paid tax on it already. So you won't pay tax twice on the same income, but you might just pay the top-up tax. So for example, if the income tax rate here was 25%, you just pay an extra 5% because you've already paid the 20%. And that applies to kind of civil service and government pensions, so teachers, firemen, policemen, nurses, doctors, etc. That's it, Andy. Okay,
thank you. Jason, Gary Malone has sent in a question, and it covers an area that a number of people are asking about, and we've touched on it in part, but if you can just summarize for us again. He is inquiring about likely changes to particular taxes applied to British citizens once we are no longer EU members. Is there likely to be an increase in CGT specifically for Brits? What's your view or advice on that currently?
Well, obviously, taxes of each country don't have really anything to do with the EU. They're all to do with the sovereign state, and they decide what levels and what rates those taxes are going to be at. Taxes between countries are effectively decided by the double tax treaties that exist between those countries, and the UK has more double tax treaties than any other nation in the world. And we certainly have tax treaties with all of the EU 27. And those treaties won't change. As I said, they're decided between the UK and the other country, nothing to do with the EU. There is the potential for certain tax rates in EU countries to be slightly different if you're a UK national that's not living in the EU. So you have rental income in France, you have rental income somewhere else, you might have capital gains somewhere else. The EU has said there should be equality of tax rates between people that are resident in there and even third country nationals, but there is the potential for those rates to be slightly higher. They have been in the past where there may have been a certain rate on rental income in Spain or whatever, and the rate on an EU national, on a UK national, the rate on the same income would have been higher, or in France, but that has certainly been equalised to a certain degree across the world. But at the moment, certainly taxes shouldn't change a great deal. We talked about pensions a little bit, and pensions are mostly dealt with through the double tax treaties as well, so that where their tax should continue in the future. So if you've moved to France, then private pensions, company pensions, the state pension are all taxed in France if you're living there, whilst, as we said before, government pensions, so doctors, etc., remain taxable in the UK. So that kind of thing. There is some concern that the UK national's ability to move his pension outside the UK, there could be an exit charge potentially. At the moment, that exit charge does not apply within the EU if you're moving a UK pension to an EU pension scheme, be it a QRUP or similar. But potentially there is the ability to extend the legislation that applies to the rest of the world, where there is a 25% extra charge, extend that legislation to the EU itself as well.
Alex, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I mean, but basically, if you own a second residence and you're not a Spanish tax resident, then you pay the non-rent. In Spain at the moment, British people would pay the non-residence income tax, and the applicable rate at the moment is 19%. But for non-Europeans, it's 24%. Okay, so there's a slight increase there of tax. But typically, as Richard knows from his because he pays it on an annual basis, on a €100,000 property, the difference is about €50. So say someone's paying €190 now, that will just go up to €240 next year. If you rent your property out in Spain, then you have to declare that income in Spain. At the moment, Brits would pay at the rate of 19%, and next year they would have to go, they pay their tax at 24%, and there are certain deductions that they've got at the moment that they won't enjoy next year. But negligible in the great scheme of things, Andy.
Richard, I've got a question here from Angela Pinto. This sounds like it should be one of the TV episodes. Myself, my partner, my daughter are looking to move to Fuerteventura to open a bakery. If I obtain residency, well, I want to put my daughter into secondary school. How easy will that be? Well, I guess that just revolves around residency. If you get the residency, you'll be able to access the school system. Is that an assumption, safe assumption, or?
Yeah, and it will be a case of going along and obviously meeting the principal and checking on space and eligibility and that sort of thing. But if you're a resident and you've got your residency status and school-age children, that shouldn't be an issue anywhere in Spain. Somewhere like Fuerteventura, I'd imagine as well, being an island and small population, and it won't take long to work out your options and hopefully secure a place either. I don't know if there are other options there, international schools or local schools. I don't know much about education in Fuerteventura. Certainly in mainland Spain, there's different types of international school as well that you might consider. But
okay. A question in here, sorry, I can't see who it's from. Driving licenses. What do we know about driving licenses and whether you'd have to take well, presumably not take another test, but at least apply for another piece of paper? Is there any fact around that yet, Paula, or is it just speculation?
No, again, you need to change your driving license to register with the local entity, with the UK is a straightforward process. With some other countries, there is a huge list of several countries that, independently of being third countries, they just also a system of changing the driving license, but you have to register your driving license at the moment you registered with residency. Otherwise, you can incur in fines, and fines can be big. So the idea is when you decide to become a resident, then you, at that same point, you organize all your other documents and the driving license as well.
Okay. Alex, quite a specific one here. Does private healthcare insurance pay for the cost of prescriptions? Well, what is the cost of a prescription in Spain, or does it vary?
Well, I mean, it varies depending on the drugs required, etc. I wouldn't have thought that the private medical cover would cover prescriptions, but I don't know.
Right.
Richard, do you know anything about that?
I do know that you can buy a lot of medicines, drugs over the counter in Spain and France, actually continental Europe generally, that you would need a prescription for in the UK, and it's very cheap. It was something I do myself when I go to Spain, is I buy the medication I take in the UK over the counter. It's for, I'll tell you, it's for gout, and it costs me about €2 a box, I think, or €2 or €3 for 3 months worth. And over here, I'll be paying an £8 prescription every month. So I'm making a little saving. But generally, pharmacies over there are very good, and they'll give out advice as well on a condition. So you can have a brief consultation with a pharmacist. You can go in there with a mild injury or something, and they will actually recommend and look at you and propose what you might need. So and most Spanish towns, all Spanish towns, I think they have to have a pharmacy open 24 hours a day, and you always see a flashing sign. There will always be somewhere open, so it's a good service. What the cost of the prescriptions are, I don't know. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Richard. We are getting I can't actually scroll through all these questions. There are that many of them. There's a lot of questions specifically about Cyprus and Italy. I'm sorry we haven't got around to covering those. We are at the end of the allotted time. What we are going to do is publish a paper or an article to cover and summarize the salient points from today's webinar. Thank you all for attending. It's been really interesting. I've learned a lot, and I hope you have too. We should have allocated more time. Clearly, that's the only thing we fell down on. But thanks for attending. We do appreciate it. And thank you in particular to the panelists. Thank you to Paula, to Alex, to Jason, and to Richard. Thank you all again, and have a good afternoon.
Thanks.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Hasta luego.